Now, you've been running a commercial for the last several weeks, too, about if you owe the IRS $10,000 or more, then you are able to work with a client on behalf of the client with the IRS to mitigate that amount.
Right.
In the context of what you just described, how does that work then?
Well, there's a couple of ways you can deal with a tax debt if you owe money to the IRS. And we've seen, I can't say we've seen it all, but we've seen a lot. I mean, we've seen the people that owe, millions of dollars to the IRS and they don't have the money. So the main thing when you owe money to the IRS is you have to communicate with them. And it's ideally not the taxpayer doing the communicating, but ideally it's the tax advisor or the tax professional that's doing the communicating.
Yeah.
Because if you try and talk to them yourself, a lot of times you'll tie the knot and put the noose right around your own neck because you don't realize what is possible when you're working out a payment plan. But when we go in there, what we'll do is we'll first assess, did you ever owe the tax to begin with? Maybe the IRS assessed the tax in error. If there's any possible way that we can get you out of the original tax liability, we attack that first. But let's assume for the sake of discussion that you actually do owe the money and you agree that you owe the money, you just don't have it to pay. In a case like that, what we can normally do is work out an installment agreement where you start making some monthly payments. And the little thing that people don't realize is that they only have 7 years to collect the tax after you file the return. So let's say you owe them $2 million, or like Austin Powers says, $100 million. Right, exactly. If you owe them that kind of money, but you can prove that you can only make a $200 a month payment, you can make that payment for 7 years. At the end of 7 years, guess what happens?
It goes away.
It all goes away.
Yeah. Now, what's the
People don't realize it. It happens all the time.
Does it really?
Absolutely, it happens all the time. But people, if they owe money to the IRS and they don't realize that they can do something like that, and most of them don't know how to do it for themselves, they just avoid it and avoid it and avoid it. And here's the bad problem. If they don't ever deal with it, if they don't file the return, the statute of limitations doesn't start. I mean, you might still, if you file your return every year, the most they can collect that return for is 7 years. If you haven't filed the return, the 7 years, the clock hasn't started yet.
It's like there's nothing to enforce the statute against if you haven't filed it.
Right.
Yeah.
So one thing that if you owe a lot of money to the IRS and you legitimately agree that you owe the money to the IRS, that you got to do is you got to get somebody in there to go down and talk to them, and that's what we do for our clients.
Absolutely, and you can get that just by calling the office this morning at 713-661-1040, or check them out on the web at Jim Trippon CPA at taxcpahouston.com, 713-661-1040, or taxcpahouston.com.